I wanted to try a new form of technology. I promised you on Sunday that I would deal with the issue of divorced and remarried people serving as deacons, and I said I'd put that in the Wednesday wake-up, which I have. But I know some of you hate to read, and I thought, well, I'll just go ahead and try a video and see if you like it. So let me know if this works for you. On Monday, when I came in to write the article, I sat down and I retranslated the passage. And I didn't learn a whole lot because it's already been retranslated a lot, and I was raised in conservative circles where remarried or divorced deacons was wrong, and I've heard all the arguments and generally held to that position. But there were two things that stood out to me. And the first thing that stood out to me was that all of the qualifications, including the one for divorce and remarriage, or for one-woman man, are listed in the present tense. And I realized that God could have very easily put them in past tense. If he wanted to, he could have said, you can't have been in the past a man of more than one wife. But he only said currently the husband of one wife. So because of that, then we have to go and we have to look at the rest of the New Testament and Jesus' teaching on remarriage, which he said is always adultery, and ask that if the ongoing second marriage is adultery. But we saw on Sunday from Deuteronomy 24 that it's not, because if you violate the first marriage and you go to the second marriage, you can't go back to the first marriage, which indicates that the first marriage has been eliminated. Thus, even though the creation of the second marriage was adultery and was sinful, the ongoing continuation of that marriage is not, at least as I understand it. Secondly, what I noticed from that passage in 1 Timothy 3 is that it doesn't mention divorce. It mentions husband of one wife. I understand where we get the argument, and where I have gotten the argument my whole life, is because Jesus taught so heavily on the issue of divorce, it would argue then that that can be read back into the passage. But I believe that's going beyond the text. And what really concerned me, especially for me personally, was that's what Jesus got on the Pharisees about. The Pharisees took the law about the Sabbath and said you're not supposed to work on the Sabbath. And they added all these regulations that you could only walk something like 332 steps or something, and that you couldn't heal someone. And Jesus came and he said, that's not what the law says. The law says to respect the Sabbath and keep it holy. And I realized that in my passion to not allow divorced or remarried men to serve as deacons, I was ignoring, and I think that often our church has failed to recognize the 11 qualities that are listed in that passage, and basing most of our decision on a quality that's only our addition to that passage. And as I thought about that, I realized that I think we really don't have biblical support to not allow a remarried man to serve on the deacon board. Wow, that's a big change, isn't it? Because we do have a church policy that says divorced and remarried men are not allowed to serve. So what do? Well, first and foremost, I think we keep the policy. And the reason is because we have several members of our church, myself until last Monday, who would have been very much offended had that taken place. And I think these people still would be offended. And biblically, we read in Romans and in 1 Corinthians that we never take our priorities to hurt someone else. We never say, look, the Bible says it's okay, so we have to do this. The church has operated just fine for 30 plus years without divorced and remarried deacons, and it'll operate just fine for another 30 years without divorced or remarried deacons. To those of you who would be offended, let me assure you that we will not offend you. It's much more important to me to keep the unity in the church than to move beyond that. But I do want to challenge you to continue to search your heart. First off, continue to hold a high view of marriage. That's where our view comes from. 50 years ago, no one got divorced and remarried. And now that everyone's doing it, we're struggling to figure out how to deal with that. Let me challenge you, myself, and the rest of the church to continue to ask, how can we be like Jesus? Jesus taught the harshest about divorce and remarriage. But he also offered the most grace to the woman caught in adultery, the woman at the well who had been divorced 5 times, as well as to Peter who denied Jesus Christ with an oath. Jesus restored him and made him a leader in the church. So how can we be like Jesus? How can we hold to truth and yet operate in grace? It's a difficult decision, and not one that I want to force you into, but one I want to encourage you to wrestle with. For those of you that are divorced, let me challenge you that unity is much more important than serving as a member of our deacon board. And let me tell you, just bluntly put and frankly spoken, being a deacon's a lot of headache. It's much more fun to be involved in the other ministries where you see people saved rather than having to deal with the difficult junk in the church that's a frustrating thing. So don't feel like you're missing out on anything. You're actually, I think, in a winning situation. And we never want to use our freedoms to offend other people. Finally, to the rest of the church, can I challenge you to use all 11 qualities that are in 1 Timothy 3? And no, I'm not going to tell you what they are, because I want you to go look them up. 1 Timothy 3, verses 8 through 12. And I want you to look up those qualities. And when it comes time to elect deacons this year, let's make that our key priority. We're not redefining the church policy, so we still will continue to have only men who are married to their first wife. But I want to challenge you to look deeply into that. And finally, don't see these qualifications as a pass-fail. See them as a freedom to serve. Because it's easy to look at this and say, oh, well, you're a failure. You're not good enough to be a deacon. No. Which is more important, to be blameless or to be a deacon? It's much more important to be blameless. And so I would encourage us, if there's anything in our lives, even as current deacons, as myself as the pastor, if there's an integrity issue, it's much better that I resign my position as pastor to fix my integrity. If I'm not having my children in subjection, would I rather be a deacon or rather be a pastor or lose my children? It's much more important to step back and say, you know, I want to focus on my children. And my goal as a pastor is if I ever have to take a 3-month or 6-month unpaid sabbatical or step down from my ministry to make sure that I have a godly family, to make sure my finances are in order, to make sure my integrity is sound, that is much more important. Because God does not need me at this church as much as He needs any of the rest of us. So let's look together as a church this fall and ask, who are the men who meet all of these 11 qualifications, who seem to be freed up to take on these responsibilities. And let's pursue unity as a church above all else, not using our freedoms to offend others, but using our freedoms to glorify Jesus Christ. That's my take, and I wanted to share that with you. Thanks for listening.